I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. The purpose of the meeting tonight is to establish the real estate tax and the personal property tax rates. And the first item on the agenda is in our new business, and that is a resolution establishing the real estate tax rate. And does anybody have a...
I'd like to make a motion to set the real estate tax rate at 89 cents per $100 of assessed value.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
What? Don't you have, or do you have that separately, right?
Yes, second.
I'll second it.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Well, I guess we've all talked about it a great deal last week, and I went through why I didn't believe it was necessary. And so I will stand on the arguments that I made last week, and I'll let others raise any other additional issues that they may have.
Anybody else?
Yes,
Mr. Brown?
too. The 2-cent increase will be set aside for, if approved, set aside for future school capital. And when I look at that, it's difficult to support a tax increase after a healthy increase last year. But when you look at the 2 cents set aside for future school capital projects, in my opinion, it's better to save a little bit along, so 4, 5, 6, 7 years down the road that we're not hit with a big spike in real estate taxes to address other school issues and concerns within the county. Because, and we're going to be, in my opinion, we're going to be addressing some issues in the Christiansburg strand for long. And what we went through with the collapse of the Blacksburg Gymnasium, and I think Roanoke had been waiting for about, out in Auburn, maybe 20 years for their turn. They were next in line, and it forced us in to do some things maybe we wouldn't have not have done at that time. And this 2 cents additional looks beyond the 12-month period that we normally look at. Usually boards, and correct me if I'm wrong, that boards in the past would look at getting from July 1 to June 30th. But we need to prepare ourselves to look beyond that June 30th of next year to prepare our citizens for what's coming down the road. And it's better to save a little bit along than to pay a whole lot down the road, and that's my thoughts.
Anybody else? Mr. Creed?
Yeah, it means I wasn't here last week. I'll take a little bit of time to try to address some things that I think is wrong with setting aside 2 cents. We tried that 4 years ago. We set aside money, and matter of fact, it was 2 cents, and we're never supposed to spend that seed money. Even if we spent what had already been put in from that 2 cents, then we were to keep that other 2 cents and keep it always continually building for the next project. Well, we not only spent for what we had saved up, but we spent the seed money also. So we have proven that we are not good stewards of what we say we're going to do with money. 2 cents for anything that this board sets aside will be spent within a year's time. It won't be set aside. I have no doubt in my mind that it will be set aside. And we'll be here next year saying, I think we should set 2 cents aside for something else. And from what I can tell, it's just another way of raising taxes on the citizens who have borne the blunt end of all of the tax raises, and from not just tax raises, but from electrical raises for electricity to water raises, and you know, we've got the highest water and sewage rates in, I know not anywhere around here close anyway. I don't know exactly how far it reaches, but it's almost double what Roanoke's got. It just seems to me that we're constantly saying we're going to do one thing and then not do it. If we're truly going to do that, then it should have some backbone in it, saying we're going to save this 2 cents for at least 5 years before we ever spend any of it. If we do that and put it to where for the next 5 years that would happen, that would probably be a good thing. Because I remember back when we put the other 2 cents, if I'm not mistaken, I made the motion that we do that.
I believe you did.
And that, like I said, that just went out the window. It's shot. It's gone. If it wasn't gone, we'd still have 2 cents, and this could be 4 cents. But unless we're going to put some teeth into it and say, yes, we're going to keep this for at least 5 years, that would put us up to a time when we may borrow some more money if we had a big project. Unless we're going to do that, then we shouldn't do it at all. And that's my thoughts on it.
Could somebody address that?
Mr. Creed, and I don't know whether we can do it or not, but if we as a board was to put some teeth in it for 5 years, would you support the 2 cents?
If it was put in there for 5 years that it could not be touched, I would.
Is it, let me ask the legal question, is that a possibility?
You can't tell anymore.
It would be it could be changed at you know, any year, or I mean, it's something that could be changed legislatively. I mean, you could agree to do it now, and then 2 months from now you could agree to not do it, and so it's not binding on any future board.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't want to sit up here. Yeah, I don't want to sit up here as a member of this board and be wishy-washy. And wishy-washy is that if we as a board agreed to set 2 cents aside to be saved for future capital, one of the things that was asked of me of some of my constituents, if you set the 2 cents aside, and the question was asked, well, can the school board get the hands on it? No, they cannot get the hands on it unless this board approves for them to be able to use it for capital projects. Now, I'm all in favor of putting teeth in that would be set aside for 5 years. And that's my thoughts to start with. If we put it 2 cents each year there, that it would build up over time, and about 5, 6 years down the road, I don't know whether we'll be addressing the Christiansburg Strand issues at that particular time. And also, I guess, some of the growth and surplus from the sale of the surplus properties may be able to go in there. I don't know. And to try to build that fund up to address issues. My thoughts are 25 or 30 years ago, previous boards had to put 2 cents aside. Now, I don't know when you put the 4. That was probably before my time.
I want to ask the administration to please respond to that.
Okay, let me give y'all an opportunity.
My question is, I'd like to ask the administration to respond to what Mr. Creed has said about how we spent the 4 cents, or have we spent it? And what was it for?
I know we had that in a previous meeting. Have you got that?
And we did have it a couple months ago.
It might take both of us to have a memory to answer this one. It was set aside and used, it was set aside for the purposes of capital, and it was used for debt service. Now, I think what we're trying to remember is exactly what year. What year?
2007 or so?
2007.
It was 2008.
8, okay.
Okay.
It was when the gas
And
prices
I
were going
believe,
up.
wasn't it 4 cents?
It was, yes.
We accumulated it over time because we had a 2-cent increase, I believe, one year, and then the next year we had the other 2 cents to add on to that, and that made a total of almost $6.9 million, which we set aside in the school capital construction fund. And then we used that, as we talked about with the 2008 bonds, to shave off the peak of the debt service. So that made us not have to raise taxes as much when we issued those 2008 bonds. And there's a table in the budget document that shows how that was spent down each year. And we have about $700,000 left that also will go to finish shaving off that peak of the debt service. And then the money that we get now from those 2 cents goes toward debt service, to the ongoing debt service.
Of the schools?
Yes.
Okay, so,
A little rough thing real quick. If we set 2 cents aside right now, that's $1.4 million. That would roughly pay for, if you were to issue debt on that and use that money to pay for the debt service, about $14 million. Okay? So if you took that 2 cents and you set that aside for a 5-year period, you'd have $7 million in cash, and then you'd still have the 2 cents ongoing to pay for the debt service. So you could take $7 million in cash, another 14 in debt, based on the 2 cents that you could pay ongoing, and you could pay for a $21 million school. But at that point, you would not have the 2 cents anymore, because that would be paying the ongoing debt service.
Debt service.
And
Going forward.
That is the problem. We don't need to be using the money we set aside for anything. We use what it has built up to set it for different projects. But these monies, if we was to keep them, we would never have to raise money anymore for structures
Well,
if we waited until we could use them. And let me tell you something else. This board, when we had some money from that 2 cents, at least 2 members of this board at one point in time, when we were doing our, right this time of year, when we were trying to decide what we were going to spend and how much budget we was going to pay, we had at least 2 members that was willing to go and try to put it back on to the school board regular money that they got. And that's a record. I'm sure it can be substantiated. So.
you mean for the operating expenses?
yeah.
Or either for operating expense or for teachers' pay is the best I remember. Is what
Well, that would be
it's gonna for.
operating expenses.
Yeah, operating, yeah.
okay, did we answer your question? It was used to, the 2 cents was used toward debt service. And the dollars that amassed from that time period that it was collected is using to shave the peak on debt service, meaning you don't have to increase taxes as high to cover your annual ongoing debt service. And that's how the 2 pennies were used and how the dollars that were collected were used. Now, if you did have enough reserved, let's say you had 20 cents reserved over a period of years, then maybe you could cash a project without having to borrow it. But in fact, the monies have generated enough to help shave the peak in debt service, and you've borrowed money to do your projects. That's
Okay.
how it was used.
So was that in the ordinance, the money we set aside, it was for school construction or debt service? Is that why we set it aside?
As I recall, as a part of the budget process, 2 cents was set aside to be used for future capital. Now, I don't have the documents right in front of me to say if it's specified specifically for school construction are specifically for debt service.
Okay, so when did we start using those? Do we have a time period?
2010 is when we started using it, that, to shave the peak of the debt service, 2010.
Didn't we use the 2 cents in the 2008 issue?
Yes, which we paid debt service on that in 2009.
But weren't we advised that that would be a good thing to do by the financial planners? Or
Right.
am I remembering this right?
Sure, I think any time that you set monies aside and save it, they certainly would recommend that you do that
Well,
as a planning tool.
Allows you to minimize future tax
in
increases.
2008, if I understand correctly, is that when we went to New York to
Yes,
get the,
that's when we looked
get
at
out-
the 2 elementary schools, the one in Elliston and the one in Price's Fork, and completion of the courthouse and the public safety building.
and
That was that $77 million issue.
sure, and we went to New York to get our bond rating boosted, and we did, and it happened, and all of that took place actually before the crash came, and
Mhm.
then we had, since 2008, we have used the money for what it was designated for, but I don't recall us saying that we had to put it aside for any period of time. But we used it for debt service and construction, which is what we were advised to do, if I'm not mistaken. I think Mary's right. So,
But we spent it to where we have it no more.
well,
Therein lies the problem.
that's,
Is
we
we don't need
needed
to
to
be
build 2
spending it.
schools, Gary. That's what we were doing with it. We built the one in Elliston and we built the one at Price's Fork. And that's why it was spent. It wasn't spent on frivolous things. It was spent on debt service so that we could get those schools.
We saved more money on those schools by doing them by design, bid, build than we ever put in them out of that money that we had set aside. There was more money come back at the end of those in the amount of about $12 million, if I'm not very mistaken, that came back. And we certainly didn't have that much in that other money that we set aside. So, you know, you can,
But it was set aside for, it was used for what it was because that helped to shave off the debt
That's
service. So
correct.
it wasn't
was used for debt service.
something that wasn't there.
you can have $5 million of money, and you can find 5 million ways to spend it if you want to spend it. Now, in my estimation, we need to either get serious about setting money aside and using that for years to come, or we don't. And right now, I don't hear any horns are blowing saying that we should set it aside, other than Mr. Brown and myself, and that's.
No one else has had a chance to say anything.
All right. Ms. Biggs?
All right, you guys know what I think about this because I've been on the board and I saw what happened in the past when we had the chance to raise revenues, we didn't. And I've spoken to this before. The board was in a state of being reactive and not proactive. We have a chance. And I agree, put it aside and build it up because we know we're going to have needs. And I think Mr. Meadows did a good job recommending that to us to do. We've been putting a cent in for fire and rescue. That hasn't gone anywhere, has it? Hasn't that been used? I don't even know how many years it's been used, but it's not like we're out buying something else with it. So yes, I think it's possible, and I think that we can do it. Now, if you have a big disaster in your county happen, like happened in Boston today, and something blows up, yeah, you might have to come back and say, well, hey, you know, we're going to have to actually use it for something else. But yeah, the intent is you put it aside because you know you're going to have school capital needs. And we know that they're probably going to be in the Christiansburg area. So to me, it makes perfect sense to go ahead and do that. And I'm in agreement, Mr. Creed. I think put it aside, put it in a fund, we can label that fund. And that fund stays there. unless there's some kind of something that happens that we need as a board in agreement to go do and fix. And so that's what we did before when we agreed to shave off the debt with the money in the first place. We agreed to that because we were advised by our financial planner. So I think it is a good idea, and I think that it's a chance that we have to be proactive, and I'm in favor of it.
Then I suppose you can show me exactly where we signed off, this board voted on it to, just to use that 2 cents.
Somewhere along the way, didn't we have to vote to use the money to shave the debt off so that we could have our bond rating be appropriate, so we could go out and borrow the money so we could complete the projects we needed to complete? Or am I just crazy?
It was, I think it was presented as part of the financial information when we were talking about the debt issues and how to finance them.
What? I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Gary, I disagree with you a little bit. And this is the reason I disagree with you. From my perspective, at this point in time, we have had a really good year. We had $2.8 million in new revenue. We got a little bit more money from the state. I won't call it matching funds for as far as school employees and being able to, they gave us some additional funds, but it's not matching. But for me, it goes back to, and you weren't here for the PowerPoint presentation, but it was over the 7 years, if we do this, we will raise from 2007, 63-cent tax, that's where the rate, to now we'll basically we got a 26-cent tax increase over that little 7-year period, 40%. And so I'm hopeful that we'll have another good year. Now maybe we don't have another $2.8 million in growth, but then hopefully we can set aside some of that money that we get in the future to be able to meet some of our needs. And that's what I'm hopeful for. So, but if we're going to do it, and I'm not in favor at this point in time taking money from the citizens and saying, look, we've got some future projects, we're not certain what those are, when I believe that those citizens have some future projects of their own. I believe those citizens have future projects. Well, I want to do this, I want to do that. Will I be able to afford it? Because I know I'm going to have to put more money in that escrow again. They're going to get another notification that there's got to be more money in it. So I agree with you on setting aside and putting that 1.4 million away. If we're going to do it, I want it to be in the lockbox, so to speak. But I fundamentally disagree with that we shouldn't raise the taxes this year based on simply we're looking at, in 7 years, a 40% tax increase.
And let me say this, I agree with you, but I can also count votes. And when I count votes and there's not enough votes here to do the other, we need to join together and decide exactly what we do want. If we know we can't do one, then the best thing we can do is to do the best for our citizens that we can and have money set aside, in my opinion,
But I'm not in favor of a specific
to try and make this money stay there rather than 2 years or 3 years from now come back and say, hey, let's got a great idea, let's put 2 cents aside. You know, that just it don't wash after a while. Kind of like washing a dog and there's no grass in the yard and you turn him loose and the first thing he's going to do is water in it. I mean, that's the first thing we're going to do. If we don't set it aside with a good lock on it, we're going to start watering in it and you're going to have a new bat.
No.
Quick question, and I need to ask this question. 2 cents additional tax on a $200,000 home, what would the additional tax for a homeowner be?
$40 a year.
$40 a year, which is about
$3.33 a month.
a month. And say a $150,000 home, I guess it would be
It's
like
$30 a year.
30 additional dollars on the year. So we're not talking about a huge amount of money. And when When we had our community conversations, we had one out in Rye and one out in the Prices Fork area. And when you have people get up and speak to the board and say that, hey, I live off $11,000 a year, but I support the 2-cent tax increase. Even my single mom got up, and when she got up, I thought she was getting ready to yell at us at the board, but she was very emotional about supporting the 2 cents additional tax to support future school capital. And on the other hand, too, there's no one love paying taxes. I mean, I don't like to pay them either, just like other people. But I think when we try to be a wise board, that when you pass a budget or a government that just doesn't stop June 30th of next year, we need to, if the 2 cents cause us to look down the road a little bit further, then that might be the way we need to go. But I believe that if the 2 cents is set aside, and I'm still on this board, it will continue to be set aside, Gary. If I mean, that's all there is to it. And I guess unless some emergency happens beyond our control, I mean, one of our buildings fall in or something along those lines, and then we're sitting here with the building that's destroyed, and we're sitting on money and says, but we're not going to spend it for 5 years. I think that we have to do what we need to do to address true emergencies. But just to spend, it needs to be set aside the way I see it.
Yeah, just 2 very brief points. I mean, speaking for this, just about the 7 people on this board right now, and we don't know what's going to happen next year or anything like that, but I think we've proven that we can stick to our guns, that we have set aside $1 million, for example, for the animal shelter, and that's stayed there for an entire year. We haven't dipped our hand into that, and we haven't even tried to or even contemplated putting our hand into that. So I think there's a little bit of precedent, at least, and obviously things might change in the future. And then secondly, I'll say publicly, I'll just echo what Mr. Brown said, that I'm very comfortable having that money stay set aside for school capital construction, barring some extraordinary circumstance, which we can't possibly foresee, but right. I'm happy to let it sit there and accumulate wealth until the school board comes to us with its kind of capital budget plan, and we can discuss that, and we can start figuring out when the best time, somewhere several years down the road, we can deploy that money.
Okay. My turn. All right, I agree with Mr. Creed on saving the money if we're going to do it. All right. I believe, as Matt said, and as we've discussed a little bit, yeah, we've been saving money for an animal shelter. We haven't touched it. We've also got a lot of other contingency funds that we've kept and we've not used. These haven't been necessarily funds that we're building, but every year we set aside money for technology and money for other things, and we stick to our guns with them. We don't always raise a penny to add to that figure, but we have that figure there. If we spend it, we bring it back to that level, and we've done that. And I would, if there's a way to put in the tax thing, I don't know if it's more tax or budget item, to accumulate the money for 5 years and not touch it, and to try to figure out a specific project for the money in 5 years. That's $7.5 million with today's penny rate. So I would go along with that. So any other discussion or comment? Roll call, please.
Okay. For what are we voting on?
We're voting on the tax rate of 89 cents. Can we put that caveat in there, or does it have to go in the budget as far as the saving it for 5 years?
No.
No, you can say it's the intent of the board to save this. Remember, it's not binding.
Right, I understand that. But we've not turned on our word
Right.
as long as I've been on the
That would
board.
be in the budget, or you would instruct
Then we'll do that for the budget session.
That money would not be appropriated.
We can do that
Be
later,
Yeah.
Put it in reserve.
Right.
because I do not support that at all. I'm, the only reason that I have that trouble with the 5-year or setting aside, because we haven't used the $1 million. All the rest of the reserve funds we haven't used them except for the purpose for which they were intended. And I guess I'm a little bit shell-shocked by the fact that the roof fell in on the school in Blacksburg, and we needed to do something to try to solve that issue. And we had no way of dealing with it. So as far as I'm concerned, whatever monies we've set aside, we have always used those monies for the purpose for which they were set aside.
Yeah, well, I think the question, though, right now, if I understand it, is we're voting on the tax rate.
That's all I'm interested
We're not
in.
voting on the budget.
That's right.
Okay. So that when the budget discussion comes up, we'll have to,
Discuss it.
and so we can't say, well, I'd support it if. We're either going to vote on the 89 up or down. Okay.
That's my understanding.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Creed?
Sounds like it has to be no.
Ms. Perkins?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
No.
Mr. Gabriel?
Aye.
Chair Paulides?
I'm going to have to say no, since we can't.
And 4 ayes, 3 no.
And you're getting a high school
Mm.
from that money.
You got your vote.
I know. I'm just saying that, Jim. Doesn't make sense, but I understand. I understand.
All right, the next item is personal property increase of $1. I mean, 10 cents.
I don't think it's $1.
Wow.
Personal property increase. Do we have a, the recommended is 10 cents. Do we
So
have a
moved.
motion? Do we have a
Second.
second?
Second.
And that, and the fill in the blank in the resolution will be $2.55. So, it's
So it's
Okay, any discussion?
$2.55.
Yes, ma'am.
$2.55 and
Basically,
$100 of assessed
The
value.
question, when was personal property tax last raised?
1994.
94. Okay.
I couldn't,
Me either.
Me either.
me either.
Me either.
But Bill, that doesn't mean it hasn't gone up. As the price of cars go up, it does go up with inflation.
Yeah.
So if more people are paying more money, we just haven't, we've been able
rate.
to keep the rate where it was.
Yeah, but
Well,
one
not,
of, oh, yeah.
go ahead.
One of the things that we hear, at least I hear, and I'm sure y'all hear the same thing, that people don't own property, but they drive vehicles and they don't share in the cost of operating the county. And some of our, I guess, real estate holders think that the people who rent or who live in the county and so forth, they don't contribute to the operation of the county, so to speak. And putting this additional 10 cents in on a $20,000 car, how, what would the 10 cents?
$20.
$20. Yes.
$20 and $20,000.
Okay, because I mean, I don't want to go home and be thinking about, oh man, it's 10 cents more on the real estate taxes, and how much is that, 300 or 400 or something, So I said that for one reason, so that the general public out there would know how much it would be, and for the people who are at home watching us tonight would know, have an idea how much it would be if it's approved.
And if I'm not very mistaken, we just last year raised taxes on real estate and our personal property. And the fact that we took the average, I don't know, we took the average retail or the average trade-in value as
Wholesale to trade
opposed to
in.
the wholesale value.
We went from wholesale value
wholesale to average trade.
Loan
isn't
to
it?
trade. Okay, went from loan value to trade value.
Loan value to trade. So, you know, it's not that we haven't gone up on that, it's just that we are kind of smooth in the way we do it.
That's true.
Anybody else?
And this is to bring in another $570,000 into the general fund, is that correct? And it said for various initiatives. I guess we will be hearing about what those are
For schools. It's for schools.
for schools.
Schools
Schools operations.
Okay, operations.
Roll call, please, on the 10 cent.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
No.
Mr. Gabriel?
Yes.
Mr. Creed?
No,
Ms. Perkins?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Chair Lewis?
Aye on that one.
6 ayes, 2 no. I mean, 5 ayes.
I was trying to look around and see if Craig.
And I have a question. I guess it all depends on how you say, where you say you're putting that $500,000. It could be going towards the additional compensation of the staff, or towards school operations, which we're increasing by $2.2 million under the proposed budget. It could go. It's going into the budget.
As we
It's
put the,
going into operations of some kind.
right, as we put the pieces,
There's a recurring.
right, as we put the
Increase.
pieces together, we designated that towards schools, but you're right, it's,
We decide on our next vote is our budget. And
So it's,
do you want to stand up here? Because I'm sure as we start adding and subtracting, somebody's going to have to keep it.
so I guess what we're just going to find out is with the 2 tax increases, and we're going to vote on a budget amount, not on any type of allocation or anything, just on a budget amount.
Well, let me just hand this one sheet out, because this is sort of where we left off the last time, and see where you all want to go from here, and then if we need to move things around, Mark's got the laptop ready to do that.
It's good. Anything other than 2 plus 2, I don't understand. I'm glad you handed something out.
Okay, just to run through this, most of this is what we talked about the last time. We went through the list of the changes in the revenue, the additional sales tax, the reduction in the compensation board revenue, the reduction in the mobile home titling tax revenue. The largest amount that's generated dollars to be redistributed came from the savings that we estimated for health insurance. There's additional state revenue for schools in the amount of $84,267. There's a correction, and we talked about this before, in sequestration, changing it in the school side from being an expense to a revenue reduction. It takes both of these entries on both sides to make that correction. It's a bookkeeping correction. We talked about that this board may want to provide funding to the Christiansburg Institute in an amount of $5,000. The Human Relations Council in the amount of $2,000. To offset any increase in dependent care health insurance, that would cost $48,000. Fund and the Mountain View Humane Spay and Neuter for extending the program for cats at $30,000. To correct an error, and we made an error when we calculated how much should go into the plan to replace voting machines. That'll cost $52,000, and then a suggestion or a recommendation was made to fund the RC&D Council based on Mr. Shorter's request, and the request is for a total of $3,000. We currently pay $2,700, so that increase would be $2,300 in total. All of those items together still leave an unallocated balance of $163,990.
Carol, and I know that there were a lot of requests that didn't necessarily get to us because there was a general consensus that there was going to be a freeze. Did the Human Relations Council make a request during this budget season?
Oh, no, let me ask Mark. Did they? They did not.
I think that came
And from a board
email
member,
to
I brought it up as a board member,
And I did too.
and Ms. Biggs requested to,
And just as I asked for additional information regarding Mr. Shorter's group, and the staff was nice enough to provide that for us, if I could get some additional information, it's hard. I have a decent understanding of what they do, but I would like, especially since they hadn't made a request, and part of it may have been they just heard our funds were frozen and we weren't going to grant
well,
anymore.
they made a request to me personally.
Okay, all right. And so I knew that there was others.
Yeah.
I'd like to just get some additional information
Yeah,
before
and
we
I told
start.
him I'd bring it to the board. I talked to Mary about it because she was the former liaison, I guess, or,
It has to do with the program that we went to, some of us went to, on race relations in Montgomery County, and they were working through the Human Relations Council for part of their money.
who was
And,
it, Father Scott?
No, this was, it was a community group, and they put on, Matt and I and Annette went, they put on a big program at, in Blacksburg at the rec center, and they want to have a follow-up program. And they had a big turnout, filled up the rec center room that we were in. And the thinking was it was probably going to cost additional $2,000, and their only place to go to was the Human Relations Council. And I think that's how it all got there.
well, a number of years ago, or for a number of years, and then for several years, they had not made a request. But this board did fund the Human Relations Council for $1,500 annually, and I believe they used that for the convocation event that you're speaking about. And then for, I guess the last couple of years, they've not made a request. I believe they were reorganizing or something.
That's
And they
what
hadn't
they
had
told me
any
when they
programs.
called, was they were
Yeah.
reorganizing, they hadn't needed the money, so they haven't asked for the money.
And I
And-
know Bill and I were at a funeral that day that
Right.
took place, and so I wasn't able to attend. But I'm not saying I'm opposed to it. I'm just saying I'd like more information if that's possible.
Yeah.
Whether they make a presentation.
I think I
or-
asked them to make a presentation if they would.
Yeah, given the situation, and also because of conversations that I've had after the event that Mary and Annette and I attended in Human Relations Council, I might recommend that we remove that here, and perhaps we could allocate $2,000 from one-time money or from reserve money to see, instead of having it as an ongoing line item within the budget. And that way, if they need the $2,000 for this year, then that could be covered, and then they could make a formal presentation for the next budget season, and we could incorporate that into the budget itself. I don't know if that would be and that way we could gather more information from Mr. Tuck, and also, I mean, if this is a situation where the money will directly go to this other community group, then perhaps the money should just go to that other community group instead of to the Human Relations Council, which again, we'll have to pass it on from somebody there.
You could certainly do that and make an appropriation July 1 out of other funds to do that.
Okay. Everybody all right with that, or do we want
I guess I'm willing to, right, at this point in time, we're just saying this is the amount of money
Right.
we're dealing with. We're
to?
really not.
We're not
looking at
allocating it yet, yeah.
And I'm happy to take it up when we look at our budget and just get more information so I make a better decision.
Okay.
So are you saying like leave it in there
Could,
as it is?
could we ask them to make a presentation to the board between now and July 1st?
Sure.
So we all know what they're about?
You can certainly do that and then decide after the presentation if
Yeah,
you want to
okay.
fund them and at what level.
Yeah.
It does not need to be included in your ongoing budget tonight.
Okay,
I would prefer that.
all right.
Carol,
Yes, ma'am.
Jim, ask a question. You've got estimated windfall at $700,000.
Yes, ma'am.
You're talking about the one in June,
Yes, ma'am.
I think.
And that money, one thing on that money does not have to be allocated tonight as part of the budget. That's something that you can come back later and say, I'd like for that to
I
go for this.
understand, but I just wanted to be sure that that's what we were talking about.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Could I, to get, maybe just to get conversation going, maybe make a motion on how to allocate this $303,290 extra? So I'd like to make a motion to approve the proposed budget with the following allocations to take account of the $303,290. I'd like to suggest $48,000 to $48,000 to cover to offset the dependent care premiums for employee health care. $30,000, and please check my math on this, $30,000 to the Mountain View Humane for the spay-neuter program, $5,000 to the Christiansburg Institute, $52,000 for the voting machine correction, the $2,300 for the New River Highlands group, $27,889 to fill the registrar's assistant registrar position, and the remaining $138,101 to school operating.
Mark, are you punching all that in? Okay.
Well,
I can repeat it if you need to.
I think we have these together. I would just round off the registrar's position to 28,000. We're doing estimates,
That'd be
so I
fine.
just roll that up. And then as far as my calculations go, it would be 137,990 to allocate to schools. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, let's just run through them one more time.
Sure.
5,000 for the human relations, for the Christiansburg Institute, 48,000 to offset dependent care increase, 30,000 for the spay-neuter clinic, 52,000 for the voting machines, 2,300 for RC&D, 28,000 for the position in the registrar's office, and 137,990 additional ongoing funds to schools.
Yes.
And I did it longhand and got the same answer. So.
And can I ask, did you say you were making a motion to make that,
Yes, I made a motion that we adopt that as a budget.
And that makes,
adopt that as a budget?
so the total budget,
It's something.
I wasn't even able to keep up with all that, so.
Well, I believe on the sheet that I passed out, everything is on there. The only changes you'll need to make is strike the Human Relations Council and add $28,000 for an assistant registrar position. And then my sheet has unallocated balance. You would take that amount remaining of 137,990 allocated to schools.
and that makes the total budget is still 167,438, 185.
No,
Oops, what did I leave out?
it's 167,602, 175.
Thank you, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong side of the column. Thank you.
That's what you get for doing it longhand.
I know, I got too many numbers.
And I guess my question would be directed to Craig, and that would be, were there any other folks that asked for money that we didn't fund here that might have very easily deserved some of the dollars?
Through the allocation process that we do back in January, there were a number of other agencies that didn't get their full funding, and some agencies didn't get any funding. However, what has appeared to be the case in the past is if those agencies weren't happy with that result, they've appealed to the board, and I'm not aware of any others that have made any appeals.
And one thing that, and this may be in here somewhere, I don't know, missing that last meeting kind of threw me a little bit behind, but anyhow, was the detention home, did we allow anything
Not
for a
for
detention home that we know we're going to have to do sooner or later?
Not for capital.
Not for future capital, no.
I mean, that seems to me like something that if there's any extra dollars within this allocation, if we know we're going to have it, it should be something that we at least try to.
Or can we take it out of the one-time monies that we have?
Well,
We
it's
still have
still
those,
in
you
the
know.
planning process. Mr. Brown and I have a meeting on Wednesday
Yeah.
about that very issue.
It's still in the planning process, and that is build new versus renovation. And a whole lot has to do with, is it DJJ, whatever, Department of Juvenile Justice?
Oh, yeah.
VJJS.
Yeah, Richmond, where approval, funding, et cetera, come out of. And then we are part owners of
Right.
the, I think it's Giles.
Radford,
Radford,
Pulaski, but Floyd is not a member.
Floyd is not a member, but they use.
Right.
they
They have
use
one-
it.
Facilities.
Yeah,
They're not an
facilities are.
And I guess we're discussing Matt's motion, but I guess we've set a point.
Do we need a second first before we can
I'll second it
discuss?
so you can discuss it.
And you know, we said, and we've talked about that we're going to set $1.4 million aside for future capital needs of the schools. What about setting aside just 10%, which is roughly the $133,000 for future capital needs of the county? And so I know that this vote is not the real budget. This is for informational purposes only, as it was advertised. But
No, this is the budget.
This is
This
the
is
budget.
it.
well, now, when I looked at my agenda, it says resolution establishing shall be for informative and fiscal planning purposes only.
Which, except in the case of the public school budget, shall be for information.
I mean,
Yeah,
this
we-
is the budget. You will do an appropriation
Nation
of the
set-
budget,
okay.
Right.
but this is the budget.
Yeah, what that means is we
Resolution.
can't set the school
Okay,
budget.
then, okay, I see what you're saying. Well, with that being in mind, I guess we don't have anything set aside for future needs of the county, whether it be.
We got a
We
little
got
bit in
lots.
current reserves,
But
but
not
not.
an operational money where we're saying every year we're going to set aside $130,000 to make sure we've got money to take care of roofs, money to take care of needs throughout the county. That would be $130,000 that we're going to be talking about.
We got reserve funds.
Well, we got reserve funds for
We
some
got
of the schools.
$3.4 million.
We've got all these buildings that we're going to be selling. We've got some reserve funds. We just set aside $1.4 million in reserve funds for the schools.
We hope we can sell those surplus properties. Chris.
But I guess at this point in time, and when I'm looking at things, and maybe I interpreted it the wrong way, I know we've got allocations that come in the future. But to me, I guess I'm looking at it as saying we're not setting aside anything in the county to say every year we're going to have to take care of some of the needs that we know that we've got coming, that Matt's talked about, that we've got millions of dollars coming down the road. It's a small amount of money.
May I muddy the waters just a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr.
It's your
Peleus?
turn.
I can find
Is
it.
it my turn?
Stir the pot.
One of the sheets that you gave us at the last meeting that showed a very long list of reserve funds, some of which we have not voted for or we have not agreed to set aside monies for. When did you all plan to bring those back to us?
As we get closer to year end,
What?
as we get closer to year end, or if the funds are needed.
So you're only going to set aside those we voted on, and the rest of it?
Well, if they're not voted on at all, they just remain in fund balance. They don't go for anything until you appropriate them. In other words, the monies that we recommended at the beginning of the year, some of those you have formally voted to go ahead and set aside, and those are formally reserved. The other money just stays in fund balance until such time as you decide you need to use it for something.
And when you say fund balance, you effectively mean reserves, correct?
Operating reserves of the
Operating
county,
reserves.
yes.
Because didn't we have something called the capital and facilities and maintenance reserves? If you added them all together, I've got two different numbers down here, 1.3 million or 1.4 million. If you added those reserves all together, is that what we had in there?
I think I've got,
Have you got it?
Well, I remember, and I did did have a conversation, I think, with Mr. Meadows about this, because some of those we had not really said we want to set aside. And if I'm not mistaken, there was a significant amount of money left even when we had not voted on all those reserves. And if we accepted the reserves, there was still a significant amount of money there. Yeah. This is,
Oh, these are all the same thing. Are these all the same?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you eliminate that, and then you've got the column.
Okay, if we can just review for some prior years.
I'm muddying the waters, and I'm
Right.
sorry, but this is
Well,
what
valid-
no,
valid
we all
question.
seem to be on the same page here, but if you remember a number of years, we would always have what we would show as options for setting the tax rate. And with that, you had windfall amounts and suggestions about how to use that. In many cases, and in the budget document, it often identifies, I think each year it identifies, certain reserve accounts that it would be our recommendation that it is included as a part of the proposed budget, that you would reserve those. Now, what that means is you've just identified that amount of money that's set aside somewhere that's there in case you need to use it. If a project were to come up, I think one year the pipes burst at Christiansburg High School and you had to go to the capital reserve, take that money, appropriate it, and then use it for that purpose. And so that's sort of how they're set aside. What was different about last year's, we never had a tax increase as large as 12 cents before to generate as large a windfall as we did have. So that put some additional funds available, and our recommendation from that was to use those in reserve. So the first part of your sheet here, and I don't know why this keeps going in and out, maybe I'm too close to it here or doesn't want to hear what I have to say. We start out with the windfall, and that number at the top, the 4,131,000 number, was what you had from the windfall. These things that you see in the red, they're subtractions from that list about how that was used. And our recommendation was to use one-time money for some school costs, that was $750,000. One-time money for some county costs at almost $400,000. We had additional monies that needed to go to the joinder study, so that came out of the windfall dollars and appropriated. Then we made recommendations to add additional funds to your existing reserve accounts, and one of those was capital, one was facility and maintenance. We also recommended set up a fuel reserve because if you recall during the time of the budget last time, there was a real uneasiness about what the price of fuel would be. So that was set aside. And again, nothing has happened to it. It's not been appropriated. It hadn't been spent. It hadn't gone anywhere. Just set aside in case you needed it for that purpose. The compensatory time reserved for the sheriff, that was set aside, if you recall, because the sheriff had actually made a budget request for $100,000 of ongoing funds to be able to pay down overtime. There weren't funds available at that point to honor that request, but $50,000 was set aside in order to do that. And I had a conversation today about the sheriff and his need, given some of the incidents that have occurred, to possibly use that to pay down some of the compensatory time that accrued. And the animal shelter reserve, as you recall, Ms. Biggs brought that up and this board agreed to do it. Now, the second piece of that was your undesignated cash balance, and that's what you get to the end of the year and you haven't spent as much as you thought you were going to spend. You have some surplus dollars left over. So there were several things from the unallocated balance. It wasn't reserved, it was money left over that was used for. And I'm not going to go through each list, but you can see how those were spent. They were appropriated and spent for those items. And again, our recommendation is to use $500,000 of that to set up the health insurance trust fund, which we talked about with self-insurance. And the reassessment office, we're just estimating, while the contract was $610,000, we're gonna need some additional money to fund an office and the Board of Equalization. That's our estimate, and we would recommend that you set some of those monies aside, have them available to do that.
So everything above that 500,000, we have used.
Or the board's taken an action to designate it.
Right, I just want to be sure.
Right, and that's-
Everybody knows that that's where we are.
Right.
Okay, now, where you get down, you see the number that says 3,397,863.
Right.
That's the number that has not at this point been allocated or reserved. And your reserve funds plus the dollars added and what's been used out of those are all detailed on the bottom chart of the sheet.
Capital, landfill, facilities, technology, auto graveyard. We have a rainy day fund of $1 million. Revenue sharing with VDOT, line of duty, which was
That's when we
added
had
to us
that's
for the-
basically self-insurance for
Yeah.
line of duty benefits.
fuel reserve, compensatory time, animal shelter, and maintenance reserve. So those are really reflected above.
And I want to make a
And
point.
the designated funds, excuse me, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Going back to what I was trying to say is our budget is because we're not allocating it. Yes, whatever we set the school budgets at, that money is allocated, and I understand that.
Yeah,
That's no longer for planning purposes. But what we're doing, we're talking about a lot of different things for that $130,000. There may be additional requests out there that we haven't heard from. And while what Matt's talking about as far as setting aside for schools, I know that that's an important issue. But I also would like to hear whether it's we were going to set aside for and say $130,000 to address capital needs, ongoing capital needs every single year, taking care of a roof on this building maybe this year, and if needs, not saying that it does, but looking at those things, I guess that's what I'm trying to say is, but once we delegate that money, the $130,000, once that's allocated to the schools,
It's gone.
that's gone.
It's gone.
And so there's no more discussion about that money at that point in time. And that while there is discussion about the $700,000 windfall that will come about, or in one-time tax revenue that comes in, and however you want it, whatever you want to call it, that windfall just kind of bothers me. But that's what I'm trying to say is if we make that decision, does it help the school board to be able to plan? Absolutely. Then Ms. Blackburn's got an easier job, and I understand that. But at the same time, once we do that tonight, it's gone. That decision's made. And any of these other groups that come forward, any other needs that come forward, we don't have an opportunity.
Maybe Matt would like to say why he felt so strongly about that 130-some thousand. It was for a certain need
Absolutely.
within the school community.
Yeah, and my thinking, well, yeah. The issue is primarily is the one that I've been talking about since the very beginning, since even before we set the advertised tax rate, which is the sequestration, and how that has specifically hit Title I and special education in the county schools, and how that affects disproportionately the rural schools in our county, specifically the elementary schools and reading specialists and things like that. And this will not cover that loss of sequestration, but it will at least kind of ameliorate, it will help in that regard. And so that's why I wanted to put that that remainder, after dealing with these other specific issues, that remainder of that $303,000 towards the schools. That was my thought process there.
I know you stated the schools at one time. Do you remember the schools right off that it would affect? I know prices for would run up and whatever.
I do have that. Hold on one second. Let me find it right here. Sure. Auburn Elementary. Sorry. Auburn Elementary, Bellevue Elementary, Christiansburg Primary, Christiansburg Elementary, Eastmont Elementary, Falling Branch Elementary, and Price's Fork Elementary. Those 7 elementary schools.
But Matt, we can't say that that's what that money's going to go to address. That's a school board decision. We have been told over and over again they don't want to micromanage it, and we can set this money aside and we can say, listen, that all right, the $4.2 million that they said they needed was in the needs-based budget. We're providing $2.2 million There's additional, if they decide to make the decision to give the raises, there's $600,000, so that gets up to about 2.8. They made the tough decision to do the block scheduling. That saved them about $1.2 million. That leaves them roughly about a $200,000 gap of their needs base. Now, I agree that this would almost completely cover exactly what they're asking for, with about short of about $30-some thousand. As I look at it. But we can't say that they're going to use that money to cover the sequestration.
That's right.
No, we can't, but again, just clear something up for me. The capital reserve increase and the facilities maintenance reserve increase, we haven't done anything with that money?
We have not spent that money nor appropriated it.
And that means we've got 1.6 million or a little bit better? Now, that capital reserve and that facilities maintenance is what can be used for the county, is that correct? If that's what we decide,
It could be.
If that's what the board decides, yes.
depending on what the board decides. But that's what it's set aside for, because the fuel reserve is set aside for the county too, is that correct?
It is set aside. It could be used for schools. It could be used for the county, depending upon what need is brought to this board. The intent is that monies be available, that this board can then decide and have available to address a need.
So what I'm trying to make certain is that we do have money that is set aside to handle capital needs, to handle facilities maintenance reserve, and we've done that from the windfall, and we will hold on to that. But if you're going to have another windfall 700 at the end of the year, we would then begin to evaluate that also. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And put it into some of these same reserve funds, which is what we do. So most of the things that are under the windfall are really things that we pretty much think might be needed for county activities.
It could be for
But
either.
it could be for anything.
And I know the school system, and in fact, I talked to Ms. Blackburn last week about the issue, is they're going to be looking at security. And while there may be some state grants available, the state grants available require a match, and they won't necessarily cover all schools. So in talking to her, there are about 16 facilities that would need a security system upgrade. At $20,000 a school, you're looking at over $300,000 in order to do it. Now, when we talk about things out of the capital reserve, that certainly is something that this board could consider if the school board makes a request.
So we do have that money if they make that request.
Yes, ma'am.
Let me ask you a question, if I could address this to Matt and see what he thinks. And my question is there some way that you could word that request for the $130,000 to be set aside just in case that the school board should ask for it for that purpose?
It's my understanding we legally can't do that.
No.
Mr. Tuck's absolutely right. I mean, we could allocate that money, and we can allocate it to operating, and they're legally within the rights to do what they want with it within operating. So, but you know, we've established a level of trust with the school board, and I think that's the best we can hope for. I've stated publicly what I hope it's being used for. So, and I think that this school I mean, even if it's allocated elsewhere, I mean, there's so many needs, so many holes within the budget. At least as far as I'm concerned, I don't have a problem.
All right, any more discussion? All right.
Moving targets.
No,
So,
I'd
What are we
like,
voting on?
yeah, I'd like
My
to.
turn to ask.
you know,
Go ahead.
I'd like to, and I know that we can't, but when you start looking at the Title I programs and the students that it will affect. I mean, schools out in, I think it touched just about all of us in one shape or form at an elementary school or somewhere out in our areas, but it's no assurance that we can put on it to say, hey, this, you need to address the Title I program with this. So I too would like to be able to address that, but we can't legally. I guess we put it somewhere, and then wherever they see the need at, that they will use it. So,
Well, we could set that aside in our own reserve system.
But it should be able to put it somewhere and not designate it for anything, and it could be used in if something was to.
I think the categories, we can allocate it to a category, but we can't allocate it to a specific purpose.
Correct.
And that's why I was trying to say, why don't we talk about that $130,000 in the next few weeks? I understand that they've got to have their operational budget, and I get that, and I know, but we can talk about that $130,000, and maybe it's going to be the full amount, and maybe and that'll address it. Maybe that'll give time for our board chairs and our county administrator and Ms. Blackburn to be able to meet and to talk and see if we can kind of come to a consensus in regards to that. And maybe it's $115,000 because there's about $15,000 in other needs that we address. And we also maybe get some input from our administrator and our staff to say, this is where, Chris, we don't need that $130,000 to set aside per year. That needs to go towards the schools and talk with the staff. That's why I'm saying it's just almost leaving it at this point in time to set aside and look at it in the future.
I don't think this is an unresolved question, though. I mean, the schools have presented us with a needs-based budget. We've seen that budget. We've talked about that budget. We are well short, not because of anything that we've done. We are trying our best to help the schools do their work, but it's the state and the federal government that are failing the schools at every locality all across this Commonwealth. And if we can help them a little bit more because we are actually able to, because of the tax increases that we've done, then I think we need to do that.
Even the state, through the composite index, told us that we were able to do more there.
Yes, they did.
We're able to do more locally.
So what you're saying here is 140,000?
137. Yeah, and I was going to try to restate that. I think the motion and the second on the floor is for a budget of $167,602,175, which includes the funding for the Christiansburg Institute, Human Relations Council, Dependent Care, Mountain View, voting machines.
Not Human Relations Council.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
Right, that's
Thank you.
gonna come later.
I'm looking to the left and not the right.
Would you like me to repeat?
You probably.
The allocation?
Yeah, please.
Sure. It's $48,000 for the dependent care premiums for employee health care, $30,000 for the Mountain View Humane, $5,000 for the Christiansburg Institute, $52,000 for the voting machines, $28,000 for the assistant registrar position, $2,300 for the New River Highlands, and then the remaining balance, which I believe was $137,990.
Yes.
Is that right? For the school operating budget.
That's the motion.
That's a motion on the floor, which was seconded.
And moved and seconded already.
Yeah. And how much then does that leave, or does that take up the entire amount down to $163,990?
That gets it to zero.
That takes it down to zero.
Balances
That's what I have, but I want to be sure.
Yes, balances it at 167,602,175. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
so the motion is on the budget amount, which is $167,602,175.
Yes.
With the
Moved and
adjustment.
seconded, discussed. Roll call, please.
Mr. Tuck?
No.
Mr. Gabriel?
Yes.
Mr. Creed?
No.
Ms. Perkins?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Chairman Lewis?
Aye.
5 ayes, 2 noes.
That's all.
All right.
Well,
If there's no other business, we have a motion to adjourn.
Can I make one quick statement? I want to thank Angie, Mark, Karen, Carol, and I'll throw Marty in there too because he helped some too. But thank these folks. They're the ones who do the yeoman's work
Well,
so-
also thank you and thank Carol.
Thank you.
Appreciate this.
Thank you.
And this doesn't cut off any discussion in the future of spending one-time money.
Nope, not
if there are projects that need to be addressed, correct?
And those reserves in windfall,
Well,
that can be
looks-
revisited too. Yes, ma'am.
Right, and I was going to say, it looks like to me that there's $3,397,863
still
of money
talk about-
that's one-time monies can be spent, plus adding up those that are on the top, it's probably almost 1.7 million. Okay.
Yes,
thank you.
ma'am.
All right. We're
I think you're
adjourned.
adjourned.
Are we adjourned?